The Hillsborough Township Planning Board meeting of June 9th, 2022. Please join me in a salute to the flag. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be advised this meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, otherwise known as Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2022 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, the Township Clerk, posted on the Township's website, and available here at the Municipal Building. In addition, application documents have been made available on the Township Civic Clerk website, and complete application files are available in the Planning and Zoning Department for inspection according with the public meeting notice. May I have a roll call of board members and board and township professionals?
Mr. Scobah, Mr. Chicarelli, Mr. Center, me, the committee, Mandel, for Vice Chair Julian are absent. Mr. Wagner.
Here.
Mr. Beeson.
Present.
Mr. Hestag.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mayor LaPlante.
Here.
Chair Sarachi.
Here.
Mr. Maskey.
Here.
Mr. Bernstein.
Here.
Mr. Sessa. Here. Has. Yes. Not here.
Okay, thank you. First up, we have consideration of the June 2nd, 2022 meeting minutes.
Mr. Wagner, Mr. Peason, Mr. Hashtag, Ms. Smith, Mayor LaPlante, and the chair.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I'll move, Mr. Chairman. I'll
you.
second that.
Okay, any comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner.
Yes.
Mr. Beeson.
Yes.
Mr. Hestag.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mayor LaPlante.
Yes, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Chair Sarachi.
It's
Yes.
a rough day today.
You're good.
Okay, and we do have a resolution for consideration. It's Sharanga LLC, otherwise known as Mo Southwest Grill, with a file number of 21-PB-03-MSPV.
Mr. Peason, Mr. Hashtag, Ms. Smith, and the mayor.
Okay,
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Beeson.
Yes.
Mr. Hestag. Mr.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Mayor LaPlante.
Yes.
Thank you. We do not have any planning board business for this evening, nor considerations of ordinances, so we'll go to business from the floor for matters that are not on this evening's agenda. So if there's anyone in the public that would like to address the board on any matters other than this evening's agenda, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we are going to move on to tonight's public hearing. It's a continuation of Harvard Way, JMJ4 LLC, with the file number of 21-PB-09-MSPV. And as I mentioned, it's a continuation from April 14th of this year, and that was without further notice.
Let the record reflect, Mr. Chairman, at 7:37, Committeeman Delport arrived.
So, hello, everybody. It's good to see everybody again. I am Jordan Ash with Ash Legal.
Speaking.
Very close.
Sure. I'll start over. It's good to see everybody again. You'll remember my name is Jordan Ash. I'm with the law firm of Ash Legal. Here tonight representing the objector party Green Hills community. We've had a few hearings on this already, so I'll spare everyone the full introduction. But we at the end of last hearing, we were about to finish up Dr. Emerson's testimony here. We did have a few more questions to ask him. And also, the applicant has submitted some new materials that he will address in his testimony tonight. So if I may, I'd like to just jump right into that.
Do we want to swear back in? Let me swear back in.
Do you swear the testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
For the record, could you state and spell your name?
Sure. Clay Emerson, ClayEmerson.
And I'm just going to assume nothing's changed with your credentials since,
No,
Sure,
no,
once again.
no, it hasn't. No more and no less.
okay, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Emerson, since we spoke last, the applicant had submitted 2 supplemental letter reports, one from Van Cleef Engineering. Did you have a chance to review that supplemental document?
Yes.
Okay, and did that supplemental document in any way change the opinions that you testified to in your letter or at the last hearing?
No, no, it did not.
Okay, was there anything that was brought up in that supplemental letter that you would like to address tonight with regards to the water quality issue?
Sure. That was relatively brief. And, you know, I just want to point out that in that letter, they're stating that they, you know, that they will do something. And,
I'm sorry, can you just refer to the letter and the date? So it's
oh,
on the
yes,
record, please?
absolutely.
Let me introduce the letter here. I'll pull it up. That's my mistake. All right, the letter I'm referring to is a letter from Van Cleef Engineering and Michael Ford, addressed to Michael P. Ogrodnik, dated May 9th, 2022. It is,
9th or 19th?
I'm sorry,
19th.
May 19th,
Thank you.
2022. The letter itself is 2 pages long. Then there's 18 pages or so of additional materials.
Mr. Ogrodnik, are you intending to have this marked?
Yes, it can be marked as an L or an A, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I would generally think it would be applicants.
Yeah.
Exhibit.
Michael, do we know what the last, I knew.
We're on 06
We're
or,
looking for A. Sorry.
not 100% sure.
Why don't we mark this as A16922? And we'll take care of it when we. Do you have any objections, Mr. Ash, to this document being entered into?
Not this document, no.
Thank you.
Okay, so
So
referring,
just to reorient, just on the water quality issue, Dr.
Yes.
Emerson, if you have anything on that.
yes, so, you know, they are proposing to add some more structures from what I understand, and they're proposing to do some more analysis. And I just would argue that everyone knows the attention that this application is doing. And I felt that you know, it's hard for me to review something that hasn't been done yet. So it would have been, everything would have been obviously a lot easier. And I know that there's a time constraint, but to have this done for the board's review, for your professionals' review, but it's essentially a will comply on that as I read it, that they will do the things that are still needed of them. But that's the extent.
What is the purpose of that, or what exactly is the well-do that you're speaking of?
Basically, they are proposing, it says that they would, and I'm reading from A-16922, applicant has agreed prior to hearing to add manufactured treatment devices to the 2 existing inlets in Harvard Way. And these were the areas that we pointed out where they weren't proposing any groundwater recharge. I'm sorry, any water quality. So they're proposing to add that. They're also proposing to do the required water budget for the constructed wetland, which still has not been done.
Okay, so just to clarify, the green infrastructure for the cul-de-sac has not appeared in any site plans to date, is that correct?
Correct, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and then the water budget calculation, which is required, we've also not seen to date, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, what is the purpose of that water budget calculation?
Well, to ensure that the system will function, frankly. And be what it's purported to be and provide the water quality it could have.
Okay, let's move on as quickly as we can here to the water quantity analysis.
Certainly. So in their letter, they point out, and I have to give Mr. DeSessa credit, he pointed this out during the hearing last time, that the storage table that we used in our model reflected an earlier version of their application. He was correct. But the point of my discussion and my calculations was that the project is going to increase flooding. That conclusion has not changed with that modification. So last time, you'll remember the exhibit that I had with the graphs, and the number that it peaked out at was 433. And since receipt of this letter, we've gone in and added the current, and there have been quite a number of them. So we got confused in going through the number of revisions here. We put the wrong one in, but we put the most up-to-date one in this time, and we still get an increase of 8 CFS as opposed to the 12 that I testified to last time. So I wanted to make sure that clear. The conclusions that I came up with are unchanged. I stand by them. And I wanted to point out that the last sentence here in the letter from Van Cleef, again, this is A16922, says entering the correct proposed basin volume demonstrates using pH analysis methodology that the project does not increase but will reduce the proposed downstream flows for the 100-year storm below existing, 221 CFS existing versus 415 for the proposed conditions, or a 6 CFS reduction. And I want to point out that statement in of itself is patently false. That's not a true statement. And Mr. DeSessa has a keen eye for these things, and I'm sure he's probably already noticed that what they've done here, they've actually modified the outlet structure of the basin. And that can be seen on page 17 of the PDF of the document. You'll see that it lists that there's a 6-inch
Sorry,
orifice.
I just want to cut you off for a second. You
Sure.
said page 17 of the PDF. We don't have the PDF up on the screen. Are you
Sure.
referring to what is marked as page 15 at the top?
It is, although I'll note that it's not 15 of the document because it's 15 of the appendix. But
Okay,
yes,
just want to clarify what we're looking at.
it does say page 15 at the top. So they've redesigned the basin again. The plans have a 9-inch orifice. The plans have a 24-inch wide weir. The plans have a 48-inch weir above that, and we have all new dimensions here, new elevations. So it's yet another revision. So I wanted to point out the letter. If you read the narrative, it doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't say that we're going to modify our design, or it doesn't even. If you didn't pan through the details, you wouldn't even know that. But this is a different outlet structure than is on the 126 revision date plans. And if there's a newer revision date that I'm not aware of, then I'm sure someone will inform me of that. But so it's been a moving target. It continues to be a moving target. I did want to remind the board that although we pulled the wrong table from the significant amount of information on this project, that this is an analysis that they were asked to do, I think, over 9 months ago. And they haven't done it until they wanted to refute what we did. So those are the facts. But that's what I had to say about the water quantity and peak flow control, that the application that you have before you is going to increase the volume of runoff, which, again, they're not required to necessarily match that, but it's going to also increase the peak flow. And this letter here doesn't give you the whole picture. And I'm sure that your professional can see those changes that I pointed out. I'm sure you'll ask for his opinion on it as well.
All right, thank you for that. I do want to give Dr. Emerson a chance here to talk about the groundwater recharge issue. But before I do, I'm not sure what the most efficient way to get about this is. The supplemental submission from Whitestone Associates, I have objection to. So I don't want to introduce it here, but I'm also trying to get efficiently, possibly without having to recall Dr. Emerson. So
I don't think you're going to get to have it both ways. It's not your exhibit. I don't know what Mr. Ogrodnik intends to do with it. If your witness intends to testify, the exhibit needs to come in. So.
Well, I'll let Dr. Emerson talk to the work done by Whitestone Associates. I'm not going to introduce the exhibit. Like I said, I do object to it, and I'll tell you now, it is because they went out and did an investigation, didn't bother to tell us or invite us.
Mr. Chairman, the problem with the witness testifying about a document that isn't in evidence is just that. It's not in evidence, and the board technically cannot consider the document if somebody doesn't put it into evidence. I understand Ms. Counsel's desire not to put it in evidence. A, it's not his document. B, by putting it into evidence, it has the imprimatur that it is in fact valid, or at least to the extent for the board to consider. But I'm not sure that he's going to be able to get his witness to testify on a document that's not before this board.
And what I'll say is, if the board would prefer it, what I would have to do is to reserve the right to recall Dr. Emerson to speak to this witness after the applicant introduces it, and I have to do that to preserve my record, if that's the way that the board chooses to do it.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that the board allow Mr. Arch to have his chance to present rebuttal testimony on the Whitestone issue if Mr. Ogrodnik puts it before the board. Mr. Ogrodnik doesn't put it before the board with whomever he plans on testifying, you can't bring him up to rebut something that still isn't before the board.
I'll just say it has been submitted, and it is on the
Well,
portal as
it's
part of
been
the record.
submitted, but it's not part of the board record in terms of the board's consideration. It's been put on the record because the board, like every other board, requires that people who may be introducing documents provide documents, not only for the board, but for the public and for you as an objector to it. But I think Mr. Ogrodnik, who is standing there.
Well, I would just say that we're certainly going to admit it as evidence. At the last hearing, there was questions about, the soil, and we did an extensive amount of additional field work. Point out for the record that Mr. Ash, I wrote him an email on April 4th. I said, Mr. Ash, as a follow-up to our several communications, please advise if your professional is intending to conduct a site visit. I've spoken with my team, and we will be able to accommodate any reasonable time request.
I'll just say that is entirely out of context email. That was before this investigation was ever in question. This was about our having a site visit, having nothing to do with an investigation by your expert, and you know that.
No, you didn't ask me for a site visit.
We requested a site visit.
And I wrote you this email.
Right.
Maybe perhaps this should be more.
Wait, and we couldn't work out a time, and we didn't go for that site visit. This is a different issue where you went out and did an investigation and did not inform me.
What obligation do I have to inform you to do soil testing?
I've
on
been
my
treated as an
property?
adverse litigant here for every chance it has to adversely affect me, but not for the benefits that I get for that. So
Well, you never asked for a site inspection.
Let me solve the problem. Let the record reflect that there is a dispute as to whether or not a site visit was or was not permitted, and I think the board will preserve Mr. Ash's record for purposes of an appeal. If that becomes an issue on an appeal, as to whether or not Mr. O'Brien should or shouldn't have invited him for a site visit. I'll leave that to somebody in Somerville to
Then I would
decide.
just like to submit this email as an exhibit.
Then we're gonna mark this A2/6/9/2022 for the record, which is, you want to indicate, Mr. O'Brien, when you're, what it
Do you
is?
plan to have a witness to authenticate that?
It's to you.
Yeah, between me and you. You really want to argue about an email between me and you about a site visit that has nothing to do with the
Mr.
investigation?
Mr.
I'm gonna mark
O'Brien,
this as A2/6/9/22.
you want to?
It's an email from Michael Ogrodnik at my email address to Jordan Ash and Eric Bernstein regarding site inspection.
I object to the context in which it's being submitted.
I can't resist. I know it's like, and the objection, counselor, is what?
He is proposing to present that document as somehow my being informed of his investigation site visit, but that document has nothing to do with that. That document has to do with us trying to schedule a site visit prior to that investigation ever being a question.
As you are well aware, because you've asked for and received multiple copies of Mr. Lombardosi's transcript, that'll also be in the transcript that you request a copy for this evening, and can produce it accordingly. I don't see why Mr. Chairman, the document can't be admitted for the purposes of the record. Whether or not it is in fact what Mr. O'Brien claimed versus what you claim, I'm not so sure it necessarily has any bearing on this board's decision.
I agree.
But
I wanted to say it's a he said, so I'm not really going to worry about it.
Can I make I'm forgetting that document. I don't care about that document right now. I just wanted to clarify the context of it.
Mhm.
If I could just make a suggestion, because we want to move efficiently, just like everybody else does. If the applicant would agree to propose to submit the Whitestone as the White supplemental report as an exhibit, now we can have the discussion about the objection, and then if it's submitted, we can talk about it and hopefully not have to recall this.
Yeah, the applicant has no objection. That's what I first suggested. A3 would be the Whitestone supplemental report.
we're going to mark the Whitestone supplemental report dated May 20th, 2022. It is 7 pages along with a copy of the Van Cleef letter, at least the one I have. Is that, or just the 7 pages? I just have, I have 100. Yes, and the test location. So the entire Whitestone document is being moved as A3. It is dated May 20th, 2022. Is that correct, Mr. Ogrodnik?
And I'll
Counsel, wish to place your objection on the record as to what your issue is with A3?
gladly, my objection to this document is that a supplemental site investigation was done after the last hearing, while we were a party to this proceeding. Nobody reached out to us, the applicant didn't, council didn't, to let us know that they were going to do this, to invite us to accompany them, to witness what was going on. So I object to this document and to that investigation as a whole.
I'm unclear of what the objection is.
I guess
How is it inadmissible?
Let me understand the objection, counsel. The objection is not the underlying document itself, is that you weren't invited to be there when they did the testing.
When they went out for their site visit and to do the investigation,
And can you point to any law, case law, MLUL regulation that requires an objector's, an attorney or an applicant to invite the objector's engineer to a site visit?
I could point to the fact that I've been treated as an adverse litigant here in litigation. That would be commonplace. And if we were in litigation in court and you did that, this would not be accepted.
Well,
Again,
at the moment, hopefully, we're not in litigation because we haven't even made a decision. The board hasn't even made a decision to litigate. You can litigate from. I just want to make sure it is my understanding, leaving aside that this is not litigation, that the objection of the objector to the applicant's report is that they were not present when the testing was done that led to the report. Is that the objection?
I don't want to use the word testing because we're going to talk about that, but I want to talk about the analysis and field investigation. Yes, that is my objection.
You want to, any,
I just don't, I know of no obligation for an applicant to invite an objector's engineer to a site inspection.
I will indicate to the board that nor do I. But leaving aside, if the objective is for the board to have a full record for the purposes of its consideration, it's up to the board whether or not it wants to admit this report.
Well, I'm going to ask a question. If you were invited and you got to witness this investigation, what would you have hoped to have accomplished? What would have been your objective by being there?
Can my witness answer that question?
Yeah, I'm looking at him, sorry.
I have, and I don't think my client has any interest in drawing this out. I have nothing to hide. I've seen 2, now 3 reports that don't make sense with one another, or and they don't make sense with the application. So it would have been a lot easier for me just to have been out there and been like, oh yeah, you're right, that is what it is, or I disagree with that. It just seems like I have nothing to hide. All I have is the reports that they provided. They're inconsistent. The third one is now inconsistent yet again. And it would have been a lot easier. It would have saved all of us a lot of time, a lot of people, a lot of expense. I've done this on other applications. I'm sure there is no obligation. Of course not. But man, that's a missed opportunity. And he pulls up the email from before the last hearing, as whatever context that is, but
I'll stop you at
it
that.
just
That
would have
part-
been a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that again.
No. So essentially, you're going to have a lot of comments on this third investigation.
It's a shame.
And it's going to probably go down the same line as last time with the first 2. So, and it'll be up to the applicant to address those. So,
Yeah.
So I don't see that, that there was anything harmful. I mean, we may wind up adding an extra night in here, because if you've got a lot of questions. So, but I that's all I see right now. I understand where your point, you'd like to witness, what the investigation, but at the end of the day, you got a report and, you'll do your best with the report, and then the applicant will do their best to address any questions, comments that you have. So let's kind of move on.
Understood.
A3 is in.
So is this document now marked?
Yes,
Okay.
A3 with today's date.
Okay, Dr. Emerson, did you have a chance to review what has been marked as A3 with today's date, which is the Whitestone Supplemental Report dated May 20th, 2022?
I did.
Did that report in any way change the testimony you gave at the last hearing?
No, it didn't.
Did you have any particular opinions about this supplemental report?
Yes. So just as a quick recap, this is the third report, the third site visit. So everyone remembers last hearing we talked about the November 2020 report and the October 21 report. I mentioned, and the report speaks for itself, the November 2020 report says nothing about not providing infiltration. In fact, the word clay doesn't even appear in the findings section with anything that they found. And the soils are coarse grained. They didn't do any infiltration testing. They said because there was gravel, no clay. They actually did test pits in November with the machinery. You remember I showed you the picture of the excavator and all that? And then they went out there again in October, and they had a summary of the soil classifications in that report, October 2021, that said 40 inches clay. And Mr. Ford testified that those were the profiles. And if you remember my analogy about the Mexican restaurant and coming back with pierogies, that's what that was all about. Like, these 2 reports are talking about different sites. Something is, these couldn't be more opposite. There was no discussion of any seams of clay in that report, nor in the original report. None. We were told that those were the logs. The only sample they took, they now think was possibly imported for the basin. Remember I said that was the worst place to take a sample in the basin? And now they're saying that the clay that they found there was, quote, possibly imported for basin installation. The biggest take home last meeting was they didn't follow the method outlined in the manual. They didn't do any testing, any infiltration testing. We held up the list of acceptable tests. They didn't do any of them. The current report and this field visit that they did in April, frankly, I don't even know why they bothered submitting the report, because they still haven't done any infiltration tests. I don't understand. Or they haven't reported any results. I don't know whether they did it or not because I wasn't there. So perhaps they did it. I don't know. And that's another reason it would have been helpful. So they've submitted a new report. They were out there a week after the last hearing. Still not in compliance. Still no infiltration testing. Now we have this description of thin seams, that's a quote, of clay. Everything otherwise is still consistent with the NRCS mapping. I use that, the analogy of the menu, everything is still right off the menu that the NRCS says. Color, depth to bedrock, texture. And I want to point out, this is exactly what the DEP was trying to prevent, in my opinion, and I was at all those meetings with the revised manual. They want to stop people from just getting creative. They want people to do things by the book. And if they're going to disagree with the NRCS and try and remap the soil because they think they know better and it gets them out of groundwater recharge, then they have to follow the black and white procedure. And that's why I said last time, this isn't my opinion. That's what it says. They have to do it. They didn't do it. They still didn't do it. So this is exactly what the DEP, in my opinion, was trying to prevent. I mean, this report says that they saw puddles, okay? I don't doubt that they saw puddles. Of course, I don't know. I wasn't there. But that's not what engineering is. You don't say, oh, I saw puddles, so now it's a de-soil, and now my client doesn't have to do groundwater recharge. Frankly, I don't care that you saw puddles. I want you to do the testing. I want you to look at the BMP manual and do what it says to do. And they've been out there 3 times, and they've yet to do that. You're going to hear them talk about, we did all this testing, we ran all these samples. Don't get confused. The test that they did is an in-the-lab test. It is not acceptable by the DEP. It is not on the list that I held up last time from the BMP manual. They didn't do testing. Still haven't done testing. And at the end of the report, they're recommending some additional investigations. Perhaps we'll hear about those in the coming months. So in summary, they've now been out to the site 3 times. We've got 3 different stories in the reports. All 3 reports are inconsistent with one another. And they want you to believe that they know better than the NRCS and that they know better than the DEP because they're not following the DEP's very specific requirements for infiltration testing and for test pits, which they didn't do, except in the original investigation. And there they didn't even do enough. So again, you're going to hear them talk about what they did do, but they didn't do infiltration testing. There's nothing they can say that will change that unless they plan to go out yet again. And if they didn't do that testing, they didn't follow the procedure, then they have to stick with what the rest of the world thinks is on the site. And that's the sea soils. And that means that they need to do groundwater recharge. And they're not proposing any that I'm aware of. So unfortunately, it's kind of more of the same, 3 times, 3 different stories. And they're not consistent. They're not consistent with one another. And I don't know what else there is to say, frankly.
On that point, just to clarify, under the regulation, the BMP manual, if a party doesn't do infiltration testing, you can't change the NRCS maps. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Or you can go with the default. There's a table that refers to the default HSG that you can assume, which would be a B soil, which is would provide even more recharge. But yeah, they haven't done that.
Okay, and despite everything that they claim to have done here, none of it is infiltration testing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Before I let you go here, is there anything you'd like to say to sort of sum up the testimony you gave before the board?
Yeah, I mean, not too much to add to it. I mean, the key points that I summarized last time are all the same. The water quality, they say they will do some things. The peak flow control, water quantity, the application that's before you is going to increase flooding. You know, and it took us to do the analysis that they should have done initially, that they were asked to do. And I think maybe thought it was too burdensome. I'm not sure why it wasn't done, frankly. They can speak for that. So they're going to increase flooding. They're not doing groundwater recharge for reasons that are unfounded. And that would be the one thing that would provide some relief to the neighborhood that's downstream here, who members of the public have come to discuss the flooding issues that they're experiencing. We're about a week away from some emergency rule changes that the state is going to be putting into effect. Probably you've all heard about it by now, or just hearing about it. And it's to prevent things, in my opinion, just like this. Flood-prone areas from getting even more flood-prone. So the residents have legitimate concerns, and their concerns are, if this is approved, are going to be even more well-founded. So I think that pretty much sums it up.
That's all I have for Dr. Emerson right now. I reserve the right to redirect after cross.
Any questions from the board?
I just have a question, just not even the results, but the methodology that you call into play, the fact that they did not perform the proper testing. Is that required to be submitted to the DEP for their approval? Or, I mean, you're saying the DEP requires this methodology of testing, but how would they know if, does it have to be submitted for their approval as part of their packet and their LOI?
Well, it's required to be submitted to you, and you're a professional. It's required to be in front of you. I mean, if they didn't need any state permits, this would be their only stop. So, but the answer is yes, but it's also required to be submitted to you. It's not something that, and keep in mind, and I think you asked some good questions last time about how the testing and lack thereof relates to what they do on the site. You asked me, well, what would they have to design if they, did have to design it? I said, well, they could do this, they could do that. So this isn't the kind of thing where anyone should say, well, let's just see what DEP thinks of it. No, this has a major influence on their application and maybe their ability to build what they want to build there. And you're required, the municipality is required to ensure that they do that testing. The DEP will too. So the answer is yes, but more to it than just that.
Drew, you got anything?
I think the answer to your question, Mayor, is yes, the DEP will look at this application and look at if they're proposing to change the hydraulic soil group. They'll look at their reasoning and their calculations to do that. So that will be part of the DEP's review as well with their state permit. And then we do also review that according to the stormwater management regs under our review.
And is the methodology that he's in questioning, is that in the report that you think, or do you think that it's lacking?
If I had I did a review, though I didn't prepare a written response. I did review the Whitestone report. I concur that there are still some discrepancies. I think the soils are marginal out there between C and D, but I would agree that the infiltration testing that is required in the regs wasn't done. They provided some justification for it, but not completely, specifically why each test wasn't applicable or couldn't be done on the site. They basically said that they weren't applicable because of the conditions on the site. So I do see that that's a deficiency as far as at least justifying the specific reasons for why specific tests didn't apply, because no infiltration tests were done.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, Mayor, is that okay? they didn't say they it wasn't clear they couldn't do it or didn't do it. I wasn't really sure. I agree with Mr. DeSessa's interpretation there, but I just want to point out that if you can't do an infiltration test on your site, that's okay. You just don't get to change the hydrologic soil group. You don't get to, use your own judgment. And, so there's plenty of sites arguably in the state where for whatever reason, maybe you don't want to tear the place up. You can't do the infiltration testing. That's okay. You got to go with what's given to you. You don't get to change the rules, change the map. So that's all.
Open the public.
No.
No?
Actually, it's Mr. O'Rodnick's cross with
He gets
Dr.
across.
Emerson.
Yep.
Can I take about a minute
Can I ask,
after Frank is done?
what they did do, which they referenced the National Engineering Handbook, and Joe, I don't know if this is you or Dr. Emerson, but what is that intended for?
What they did was the testing that's required if you were to build a septic system at your home.
Okay.
They even referenced 7:9, which is if someone wants to build a septic system, that's the test that I believe the state would still accept. They even used the form from the septic regs. And many years ago, maybe, I don't know how many, that used to be acceptable, but the state saw that was leading to a lot of failures. You can imagine a septic system and an infiltration system. Yeah, there's some similarities, but they're also very different in the way they operate, and what's asked of them. So what they did is no longer acceptable. And I was on the 3-person stakeholder group that dealt with infiltration tests and the revisions to the manual, and went to essentially every one of those meetings with a very small group. And I can assure you that the test that they did is no longer acceptable, unless you're building a septic system, which I don't think they are.
So, Mr. Delcor, just to clarify, I think you were asking about the reference in the report regarding the engineering handbook, National Engineering Handbook, which is something put out by the USDA, and they referenced that in the Whitestone report. So that document has basically been prepared to describe what all the different soil groups are and what their parameters are as far as percent clay versus sand and infiltration rates. So the applicant did compare the data he got in the field from the soil sampling to the table in that handbook, which outlines what characteristics are of A, B, C, and D soils. So based on their study, coming up with the percent clay versus sand at their depth of 40 inches, and I think based on the infiltration rate they got from the testing they did in the lab, they came to the conclusion that it was a D soil.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to respond to that, I have very familiar with that, the reference that we used, referred to in our letter, our exhibit from last hearing. That indeed is the document that DEP references in one location about how to classify A, B, C, or D. But I want to point out that this document, and I have it in its entirety in my hand here, but I'll just generally refer to it. In no place in this document does it say if you have a loam, or if you have a sand, or if you have a clay, you're A, B, C, or D. In no place does it say that. It has a table, and on that table, you need to run an actual infiltration test to determine, and some other things, but you need to run an actual infiltration test to determine if you're A, B, C, or D. It doesn't say if you have 50% clay or 20% sand or anything like that. And that's what their test did, was just a grain size analysis, which again, if you're building a septic system, you're good to go. But DEP specifically requires in-field, in situ is the term they use, infiltration tests, meaning you're passing water through the soil and you're measuring the rate in some way or another. There's different tests, 7 of them or so, and they didn't use any of them. And that's what this table refers to, is the rate. It doesn't say if you've got sand or clay, you're A, B, C, or D. You could have a clay soil that's a B. You could have a sand that's a D. There's more to it than that. It's all in this table, but to use the table and to use this document, you gotta do one test. They've been out there 3 times, they haven't done one test. So.
About 90 seconds.
Need 90? Okay. We're going to just take a short recess.
And then it's Mr. Obradnik's cross. Before the public.
Okay, we're back in session. Counselor?
I believe
Mr.
it's Mr. Ogrodnik's turn.
I have no cross for Mr. Emerson. I'm going to reserve my rebuttal to my experts.
Then, Mr. Chairman, it is a motion
We
to
should
open the public.
Okay, may I have a motion to open the public?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, if there's anyone from the audience that would like to question Mr. Emerson on the testimony that he's given this evening or prior, we'll keep that going. Feel free to come up. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any other witnesses, Mr. Ash?
Yeah, we have one witness who's a representative of my client. I'll introduce her when she comes up here.
I guess we're going to swear you in. We're going to swear you in.
You swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
For the record. You state and spell your name, please.
Mary Ann Sawade, 142 Johansson.
You gotta get it closer, Mr. Wade, the
Okay.
mic.
Mary Ann Sawade,
There you go.
Sawade.
My apologies there. So Ms. Wade, you were just sworn in. Can you introduce yourself, your name, and your address, please?
Sure. Mary Ann Sawade, 142 Johansson Avenue, and co-founder of the Green Hills Community.
Okay, and can you explain to the board exactly what Green Hills Community is?
Green Hills was organized to protect our neighborhood from irresponsible development that will lead to more flooding in our community and to ensure the stormwater system deficiencies are mitigated. I've been chosen to speak on behalf of our group to provide a cumulative statement in an effort to make Our combined points clear and concise and backed by factual data. As you know, there are major drainage problems in our neighborhood area. We've been told the Township's engineering department is working to assess the drainage issues in order to find a solution, but it hasn't been completed yet. We don't know if it can be corrected, how it can be corrected, and if there will be resources and budget available to complete what is needed to be done. We need the stormwater drainage deficiencies remediated first before any more development is allowed to be built in and around our area. The proposed warehouse will make impervious almost 3 acres of land while removing water-absorbing trees and disturbing wetlands. We need the trees here in our neighborhood. It doesn't help us to plant them in other areas of our town. Our engineer has shown that the construction of this warehouse will in fact increase the peak runoff and cause more flooding to my neighborhood. Green Hills community is directly downstream of the stormwater runoff from the following existing developments, which over the last several decades has contributed to the increased flooding problems we have now. We have Village Green, St. Mary's Church, the Courtyards development, Stellar Academy, the existing warehouse on Harvard Way, and the widening of 206. All of this water runs towards and collects in the drainage swale that runs along the rear of our properties on Johansson Avenue. At 122 Johansson Avenue, there is an inlet with a pipe that is supposed to carry the water to the river. This pipe cannot handle the water flow, so once it's overwhelmed, the water naturally flows down a swale between 2 homes and into the stormwater system in our streets. The lowest point is Kimberly Road, where the homes were completely engulfed in stormwater flooding during Hurricane Ida, prior to the river swell. As you know, on the evening of Hurricane Ida, on September 1st, our streets, including Johansson Avenue, were completely underwater from 4 inches to 4 feet. The stormwater grates were submerged and bubbling. The 6-foot deep by 4-foot swale that runs along the rear of Johansson Avenue was overfilled, and a river was raging down the swale. The water was over its banks and running across the rear of the back of our lawns. Members of Green Hills and others on Johansson Avenue, in the back corner closest to the proposed warehouse, began reporting that they had water coming into their homes, and they have never, ever had water in their homes before. In the middle of the night, the homes on Kimberly had flooded to their gutters, and some families with children and pets had to be rescued from their rooftops by the National Guard. We were completely surrounded by floodwaters and unable to leave the neighborhood for 2 days. The flooding issues we have are recurring. Recently, I've been hearing members of the board saying that Ida was an extreme event, and I do agree, but the effects of Ida were real and they're tangible. We expect that these extreme events will continue to occur at greater frequencies. I consider the real-life experience that transpired from Ida and the other storms that we've had more relevant than the developers' estimates and calculations based on old data that is continuously being provided by these applicants. Our engineer's analysis of this application shows that this development will have significant impact on flooding, even during a commonplace 2-year storm event. Ida was not a one-time incident, and flooding has gotten worse with every new development. What we know as a fact is the stormwater system along the rear of Johansson Avenue is not able to handle the runoff from all the properties already tied into it, much less from this proposed warehouse and the campus development, which both want to tie into it also. We await the results of the Townships downstream analysis and watershed assessment and the study of the waterway that runs along Johansson Avenue. We do not know if it can be mitigated. We cannot keep allowing all of this building to occur. We hope there are solutions to mitigate the flooding issues that affect our area and that there are resources to fund this mitigation. These problems need to be fixed before there is any further consideration of more development in our area. In light of the evidence presented during these hearings and the testimony of our engineers expert, our engineering expert. You must deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. I know that as a witness, we're subject to questions, so if anyone has any questions. Board? Let's go to public.
None from the applicant. The answer is yes, you can open to the public.
Okay. Are we already open? I have to
I
open for
think
each
you
one.
already probably are.
Was that?
You are.
Okay. So if there's anyone from the public that would like to question or cross-examine the witness on her statement, testimony, please feel free to come up. Okay, see no one. Counselor, anyone?
Okay, that's all the witnesses that we have right now. We reserve our rights. I understand that the applicant has some rebuttal witnesses to put up, and I don't wish to rehash the argument that was previously had, but I will state that the objection I previously made through email correspondence, Mr. Bernstein, is part of the record, and I understand that the board has made its decision on that.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.
Counselor, for the record.
Good evening, members of the board. Mike Ogrodnik, Savo, Shaw, Corsini, Gillespie, Ogrodnik, and Fisher. On behalf of the applicant and now owner, Harvard Way JMJ4 LLC. With me tonight, I have one, potentially two witnesses. We have Michael Ford from Van Cleef Engineering, our professional civil engineer, and Kyle Kopaz, our professional engineer from Whitestone Associates. So I'd like to call Mike Ford.
You swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
For the record, could you state and spell your name, please?
Michael Ford, Ford.
Mr. Ford, you're still a licensed engineer in the state of New Jersey. Your credentials haven't changed since our last hearings, correct?
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity to respond to the Princeton Hydro letter report dated March 29, 2022?
Yes.
Could you go through your rebuttal, your response?
Okay.
Can we indicate for the record what that response is?
It was marked as a
A1?
one. Right. Okay. We've been through the stormwater analysis, the three different criteria you are to address, recharge. We've discussed at length quality and quantity. First with the quantity, the quality. Believe actually not at our last hearing, but the hearing before that, and perhaps the hearing before that, it was brought up that there was a small area of the public road extension of Harvard Way, which would not be treated directly by BMP for water quality. I testified at the time that that same stormwater does go into the existing wetland area basin, which is to be enhanced by this project and upgraded and enlarged substantially, which does provide for water quality treatment. But because the drainage area in totality to that existing water or proposed water quality feature of the wetland pond, you couldn't take credit for that. And what we testified at the hearing is that we would provide the Infilterra or some other type of green infrastructure, BMP, in advance of the two existing, these are existing catch basins on Harvard Way. We didn't provide a revised plan because I guess I'm a little confused because at times we're being criticized for reacting and providing information, updated information. And in this case, we're being criticized for not providing the specific plan that shows those two BMPs in advance of those catch basins. But certainly the board knows that on many applications, there's conditions of approval, and we've agreed to do that. So there's no dispute that those would be provided. And with regards to whether they meet the standard or not, the board has an engineer, as they do in many applications, who is fully capable of reviewing that. And we also have the application pending at DEP, and we've, received comments and responded to those comments. With regards to the geotechnical, as the board knows, the applicant engaged consultant, Whitestone. They've done testing. Without getting into the specifics of the testing, that's not what our office prepared. But with regards to the recharge, I stated at the last hearing, that's one aspect of stormwater management. With or without recharge, the analysis of the water quality as well as the quantity doesn't change. They're all done independent analysis. With regards to recharge, with a soil that doesn't have permeability or lacks permeability to support an infiltration system that would be used to implement recharge, I think from a practical standpoint, that could be understood. What I think that the applicant would agree to do is that with regards to infiltration or additional testing, if Mr. DeSessa's office has need for further clarification as to why a test was done, why a test wasn't done, if additional testing needs to be done, and should that testing yield something that would support an infiltration system that could be used for recharge, the applicant would be willing to do that. Typically, infiltration basin or an infiltration recharge system would be something perhaps under a paved area. So there would be no substantive change to the plans for that type of infiltration system. Another mechanism could be to implement porous pavement with a recharge system under it. I think the other thing that can't be neglected is that it can't be done in an absence. There's, these infiltration systems require separation from groundwater table. So it's not just infiltration. With regards to quality, I have a real hard time with how this is being presented by others. When the state code clearly states when you provide an on-site detention basin and you're required, and you've heard me and others at numerous applications, a reduction in the peak flow from a site for the 2, 10, and 100-year storm. And there's no talk of reductions in volume. There's no talk of analyzing a site 500 feet downstream, 1,000 feet downstream. I'm not sure how even the point of analysis was selected, but there's nothing in the state regs that require that. And in this case, where we're required to reduce our peak flows for the 2, 10, and 100-year storm, for the 2-year storm, the allowable peak flow discharge is 8.84 CFS. We're at 2.6. For the 10-year storm, the allowable reduction or discharge is 25.9 CFS. We're at 9.7. And for the 100-year storm, our allowable discharge is 62.3 CFS, and we're at 34.5. To make a presentation and completely not even acknowledge that fact, that those reductions for the 2, 10, and 100-year storm is, don't understand that. With regards to the analysis downstream, it's not required. And we point out that the analysis was done in error. And we present an analysis that shows that even with that type of analysis, that is picking some point downstream, picking an overall drainage area to it that's perhaps not accurate because it doesn't have detailed site-specific topography for the entire drainage area. Not disputing any of that. Even the fact that the analysis would use type 3 rainfall data when I've done numerous DEP applications and other applications, and now we're using NOAA rainfall distribution. And as you heard, and we understand there's a plan now for the state to perhaps change that rainfall data again. And I think that's probably the biggest point that the room needs to understand is perhaps the changes in these flood conditions are more directly related to changes in actual rainfall events. And the state is acknowledging that, and we've acknowledged it in our analysis using the NOAA rainfall data as opposed to the type 3 older rainfall data that was used in the report by Princeton Hydro. All of that in totality, the applicant's efforts to not wait until all the conditions of approval are laid out and then make revisions to a plan as a condition of approval to the satisfaction of the engineer, but make an effort to make changes as we see them and report them to the board, and not necessarily changes that are even directly requested, but changes in an effort to do above and beyond what the regulations require. When you're allowed a discharge of 62 CFS and your analysis shows a discharge of 34 CFS, and somebody reviewing your report doesn't even acknowledge that fact, I'm not really understanding that. And we're all here, like the day after Ida, I live here in town. The evening of Ida, I waited in the intersection of Amwell Road and Beekman Lane in knee-deep water to rescue someone from a car. The day after Ida, I could not get out of town because all the roads were closed off, including probably over a mile's worth of Route 206 in the vicinity of this project from west, Dukes Parkway West, all the way up to the shopping center in Raritan Township. That's a state highway that was built within the last 20 years, completely underwater. I reviewed and visited numerous projects that we built throughout the township and are under construction to see how the detention basins reacted. And I didn't see a single one. That's Amwell Terrace on Amwell Road under construction, even all the areas not destabilized yet. So all the grass is not even there that would promote infiltration. No overtopping of a spillway, no basin completely filled. I'm confident that our designs, and that's our goal, that our designs are done in a manner that would provide not just a minimum standard, but above it, and would function that way. And we have a wet day list in our office to visit basins and stormwater management facilities to see how they react after a storm in a practical standpoint, not theoretical, not some research study. The same would be true for a major project next to Bottle King with an underground basin. Visited the site. No indication of overflowing of the detention basin, that it was inadequate, that it didn't function as it was designed. And I care about what I do. I've had occasions where I've walked out of this building and had people scream at me, how you can sleep at night. How can you sleep at night? I think they were thinking about, because of what I do, design projects in accordance with regulations, in accordance with land use regulations. In this case, this is completely compliant with the zoning. This industrial zone has been there for years, probably in place long before many of the people that lived by it moved into the area. So there would have been full information and knowledge that this type of project could be built near them. But I also do feel for people that are in older communities that were built years ago that are in a floodplain. Just at the intersection of Johansson and Dukes Parkway East, just north of that is the Raritan River with a drainage area of over 300,000 acres. We're talking about a site that's 8. And I'm sorry, but I would really like to see the analysis that the flooding conditions will go away or even be substantially impacted by a project like this. If I build a moat around the entire site and didn't discharge a single CFS, not 80, 62, but 0, I found it hard to believe that there would be some appreciable difference in the flooding that's occurring on the Raritan River with over 300,000 acres. But beyond that, as part of this application, we made an appearance before the Environmental Commission, and we talked about the flooding of the neighbors. And contrary to what I've heard at other hearings, I didn't say, I haven't been retained to solve your drainage problem. I didn't say, I have no thoughts and concern for your drainage problems. I reported to the Environmental Commission that, hey, there's a township lands just to the east of this site, lot 6, where perhaps maybe some regional basin could be built. Maybe at the end of Tyler, there could be emergency access built through this land up to Brooks Boulevard so that these people wouldn't be trapped in their community when the Raritan River inundates Brooks, the road access from Johansson and the other roads in this community. There's also, and I mentioned this to the Environmental Commission, there's jug handle at the intersection of Route 206 and Dukes Parkway West, where in the middle of the jug handle, there's a stormwater management basin that the state built. But beyond the jug handle, back toward this drainage feature that we're talking about, not near this site, but downstream, there's a pretty substantial piece of land there. Hey, perhaps when the township engineer and with the help of Tom Bellinger, your assistant engineer that's been here for years, that could be utilized and perhaps the state could participate in some kind of regional solution that would help to abate some of these drainage issues. I probably said too much already, but yeah, I don't sleep at night. I don't sleep at night because I want to solve these problems, not just for one client, but all clients, not just for one resident or applicant in Hillsborough, but all of them. We endeavor to do the right thing. We endeavor to do it properly. And when it can be done better, we make revisions to plans. And I'll keep making revisions to plans if it makes it better, in spite of being criticized by making a lot of revisions to plans.
I have no further questions for Mr. Ford.
Board? Okay.
Mr. Ash.
Yes, Mr. Ash.
Thank you.
Mr.
Ford, I appreciate that impassioned testimony, I do.
Talk into the mic, Jordan.
Mr. Ford, I appreciate that impassioned testimony, I do. I would just like to confirm a couple of points though. The site plan as provided here today does not provide any recharge, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and the NRCS map for this site shows majority sea soils, is that also correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Is it also your understanding that no infiltration testing has been done at this site?
I think that's a geotechnical question.
Okay. And then with regards to water quality, is it not true that despite having several months to provide updated site plan showing the required treatment for the runoff from the cul-de-sac that has not been done to date?
We haven't provided plans that show that.
Okay. And additionally, you've had the same amount of time to conduct the required detailed water budget analysis, including a wet year, a dry year, and an average year, but this too has not been done to date. Is that correct?
As I stated in my letter, we provided a water budget and we agreed to expand that water budget with additional detail as requested.
That additional detail, which is required by the rules, has not been provided, correct?
Mr. Ash.
It's a simple yes or no question.
Okay, no.
And is it your testimony here today that under the New Jersey Stormwater Management rules, that you are not required to address flood-prone areas of the site?
At the last hearing, that was discussed. And it was my understanding that not only, that the board's engineer identified the section that the P&H report referenced in the DEP manual, and it does not apply as has been suggested.
Okay, and then to achieve the purported 6 CFS reduction with regards to the downstream impacts on your supplemental letter, is it correct that you had to change the measurements of the outfall structure?
We did the analysis in accordance with the quality of the basin as expanded, as well as what the configuration of the outlet structure would be.
But the configuration of the outlet structure?
Yes. I thought you had a yes or no question. I'm sorry. I elaborated too much, but
I'm just
yes.
trying to clarify, sir. The analysis that you presented is not at what is provided on the site plan.
No.
Okay, and then per the downstream analysis that you've now conducted, there is a drainage area present of much greater than 50 acres, which, as you know, is an important threshold for the application of flood hazard area regulation and permits requirements. Has this applicant, to your knowledge, ever sought or obtained a flood hazard area verification?
Not to my knowledge.
That's all. Thank you.
Can you redirect Mr. O'Grodman?
No redirect, Mr. Bernstein.
Public? Okay, if there's anyone from the public that would like to question or cross-examine Mr. Ford on his testimony, please come to the mic, state your name and address for the record, please.
Rich Garman, Winding Way. I hope I can address this with him or maybe the board attorney. I'm hearing a lot. I'm not an environmental expert. We all know there's flooding in these areas. The township recognizes that because they're going to do an assessment. Who's liable when these systems that are presented fail? Because sooner or later they will fail. Who's liable when people's houses flood because these systems fail? That's a township resident. The township's liable. All of our taxes are going to go through the roof. But who's liable? Systems fail.
You have a question for the applicant. That's what this testimony is
Well,
about.
the question is, who's liable if your systems fail and there's increased flooding?
To answer your question about the detention basins, and I believe this was discussed at a prior hearing, the township has an ordinance that requires any property owner with a detention basin or any kind of other stormwater management facility to do annual inspections and to provide the engineering department with the results of that inspection. So that's a mechanism for enforcing ongoing and proper maintenance of systems to ensure that they're functioning properly. And there's also now as part of any application, and I think this actually came up on this project because we have a 30-year-old basin that's not well maintained, and years ago there may not have been proper mechanisms in place to ensure that they're properly maintained. But now, in addition to that reporting, there's also a recorded document at the county clerk's office so that that makes any person that's an owner of this property aware of the maintenance responsibilities of the detention basin or the stormwater management facility. So it's not in a situation where the owner doesn't have documentation made available to them when they transfer ownership. So if this property owner were to sell it to someone else, the responsibilities of that detention basin maintenance are apparent in the deed, just like any other easement on the property. So there's mechanisms in place to help ensure that the systems are operated and maintained properly.
But if that mechanism fails, is the operator liable for damages that are incurred?
I hate to say it, but I'm not a lawyer, so that's a legal question. And it would be maybe, you'd have to do investigation to see if there was something that, like something simple as, a breach in a right, and it washes out downstream and causes something.
Somebody's house was never flooded. Is he now liable because he didn't maintain?
And that would be a legal question. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Or anyone wishes to cross-examine? Again, please state your name and address for the record. And again, it's questions of Mr. Ford's testimony.
Maria Janusik, 720 East Freck Avenue, Manville, New Jersey. Excuse me. I'm also a Hillsborough Township property owner, Block 86, Lot 3, 2155 Camp Lane Road. Mr. Ford, did you state that there are 2 existing basins? Is it on this property?
I think maybe what you're referring to is there's 2 inlets like on the road at the end of Harvard Way.
So
I just want to make sure he was okay. Yeah, at the end of Harvard Way. There's only 1 existing detention basin.
Also, 1 existing, and on what property is that existing basin?
On the subject site.
The subject site. So for whom was this basin built?
It was built as part of the initial construction of the existing warehouse at the intersection of Campus Drive and Harvard Way.
And what is that property?
That's our immediate neighbor to the north.
Block 58, lot 1.08?
I don't have that information in my head.
So there was nothing existing on this property but a stormwater basin?
No, there was an approval in the 80s, and we discussed this at a prior hearing. There was an approval in the 80s that included the building that exists and a phase 2, which would have been a new building on this site where the detention basin is. And at that time, it was contemplated that there would be even more impervious coverage on this site. But that building was never built.
Okay, so you mentioned a building that exists. Where does that building exist?
On the site to the north of us, not on this
On a
property.
different property?
That's correct.
The property that's adjoining Block 58, lot 1.09?
The subject site is lot 1, 1.09 in Block 58. The existing building is on Lot 1.08 in Block 58.
Right, so that's adjoining. So does Block 58, Lot 1.08 have a detention basin?
No.
So was this detention basin originally built to accommodate Block 58, Lot 1.08?
That's my understanding, yes.
So whoever owns Block 58, Lot 1.08 should have been responsible for the maintenance of this detention basin?
Wasn't part of that application. I can't answer whose responsibility was what at that time.
So the detention basin was sitting on an empty lot where no one had responsibility for it?
I think my answer would be the same as your prior question, since both of them are similar.
I'm sorry, what is the answer to that?
I wasn't part of the application in the 80s, and I don't know how the responsibility of the basin was assigned.
So since this basin wasn't maintained for 34 years, can it still be called a basin? Because I think nature took over and things got overgrown, and I think, what was it being called, a wetland?
Yes, it can still be called a basin, and part of the outcome of the project that's being proposed would be that the basin would be upgraded, expanded, and its maintenance would be ensured with the regulations and the mechanisms I just described to the prior individual from the public that was up before you.
All right, so you're calling it a basin. This was built, or whatever, how you would say constructed, this basin in 1988, or about 34 years ago? How can you say that that was a functioning basin? How could that be upgraded or whatever when this nature took over and this was and no one maintained it? So how is this being called a basin? I mean, this is an application. There's a records retention schedule for the planning board that certain things over time are not valid anymore. So how is this this hole in the ground that everyone's calling a basin considered a basin? And then if it is, then then it should have been the responsibility of that property owner to maintain that basin, according to what was said before.
Yeah, the stormwater management collection systems from Harvard Way, Campus Drive, as well as the existing warehouse have stormwater piping that takes the stormwater from those improvements and discharges it to this existing basin. We're not here as part of this application to argue or address prior applications. This application is included substantial improvements and expansion to that existing basin, which would be a benefit.
You said that there are pipes and whatever leading into this basin from other properties?
Yes.
Fine, so then who over the years maintained this? No one?
I'm going to object.
Yeah,
I asked and answered about 3 times now.
Yes, but Ms. Cheney, so you get it?
So no one was responsible. Whose ever property, the stormwater went into that basement, no one had responsibility.
That's
No
not
one from
relevant
those
for
properties had responsibility.
for this evening.
Hearing questions, Mr. Ford?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The adjoining property owner also has pipes or whatever flowing into that basin? From block 58, lot 1.08?
Yes.
Is that the same owner as the owner of block 58, the subject property, block 58, lot 1.09?
No.
No? Is the applicant, the owner of?
Mr.
Block 50,
Ogrodnik
lot
addressed at the
1.08?
introduction here,
The what?
the owner. Mr. Ogrodnik addressed at the very beginning of the hearing that the applicant owns and has title to the property.
To the adjoining property.
No, so what you're asking me is lot 1.09, the same owner as 1.08 where the existing warehouse is. The answer is no. The subject application is for lot 1.09 and the applicant owns that property.
And he has no ownership to the adjoining property.
No.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else would like to question Mr. Ford or cross-examine? Okay. Don't see anybody?
I have no further questions. For Mr. Ford, I just want to reiterate that the applicant would agree to continue to do any analysis that would be necessary by the board engineer to put to bed what's seemingly the final issue, which is the groundwater recharge. So we would ask that the board approve this application conditioned on the additional data that may be required by the board engineer. It is kind of a bit of a red herring in my view, because we will agree, if it's a Class C soils, we'll agree to those necessary infiltration measures at the satisfaction of the board engineer. So it's not like we're trying to save money. What we're saying is we've done the analysis, we think it's Class D, we've designed it based upon those reports. But if for some reason the township engineer and their geotechnical expertise in their office would like some additional data, we'll agree to, the types of reasonable alterations that would satisfy the township as a condition of the approval.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference here is that you got an objector, and I think they're going to want to see any additional results from that. So I'm not inclined or to recommend that to the board at this point. I think we got a very unique situation.
Got to come to me.
By the way, before everybody states and not stating, are you done with witnesses, Mr.
You gotta
Ogrodnik?
talk into the mic too.
Are you done with witness? Thank you, Mr. Ogrodnik.
I'm not certain yet. I believe I am.
Yeah, okay.
Just response to specifically what was just said there. Any agreement to, achieve recharge through sea soils, no feasibility has been proven for that or anything. That could entirely change the site. So that's not something that is a reasonable condition for approval. And there's obviously more to say here, but I'll stick to what was specifically said right there.
That's what I was anticipating, so.
I have no further questions for Mike.
Michael, how you doing?
We take a break now.
We want to okay. We will take a recess. We'll come back at 9:15. Okay, we're back at a recess. Let me try to turn my mic on. We're back at a recess.
Okay, so I spoke with my client, and I think the course of action that we would like to recommend is to adjourn to a future date to allow the board engineer to conduct tests or to supervise tests regarding the soil conditions and get the next available hearing date. And if there's recommendations from Mr. DeSessa with respect to the soil classification, then we'll make modifications to the plan at his direction. So that's what we would suggest.
I oppose that rejection. I think this applicant has had plenty of time to make all the available changes. They've known since at least January of all of the things that we were saying. They've had their report since the end of March. Mr. DeSessa has had plenty of time to look at this, as had the applicant. I think they've made several amendments. They've still failed to meet compliance. They've not shown they can feasibly adjust the site to have sea level recharge. I think this board has enough information to vote, and to vote now.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I don't want to sound like I'm parroting Mr. Ogrodnik, but I am somewhat. I don't think the board has, at this moment, enough information from its engineer as to the various reports that have been submitted by all parties. And while I understand Mr. Ash's conclusion, I'm not so sure at the moment the board can reach any conclusion one way or the other regarding the application as it relates to this issue. There may be others as well. So I'm recommending to the board that Mr. DeSessa's office provide to the board a complete analysis of all the reports that have been provided, not only the ones from the applicant, but the ones from the objector, and depending on what he sees or what they see, and he recommends, I think he even indicated he hasn't had a chance to do the full report, that all the parties get a chance to see it in advance of another hearing. And if they want to deal with their own responses to it, therefore, and depending on what it is, the board may want further action taken.
Any comments from the
And
board?
that would include geotechnical work, right?
Well, I mean, there's a way to do it. It like Mr. Bernstein said, we would just basically review all the reports and provide the board with our opinion of what is correct and what is not correct, what complies, what doesn't comply. Or, as was suggested, actually doing testing, that would be something up to the board, whether they would want to bring it up, say us in to do additional testing, or whether we would witness testing that was going to be done by the applicant.
Yeah, I wasn't so much indicating you guys needed to do the testing as much as do the review from a
Technical standpoint of the
yeah.
information against
Correct.
the reports that have been submitted, and then we'd have to issue our opinion of everything that's there in a written report for the board's consideration.
And if there was any recommendations, or if there's any thoughts about doing additional testing, would we have that discussion here at the next hearing, or would they do it privately between?
Well, I think if the board is inclined to ask Mr. DeSessa's office to conduct its own testing on above and beyond that, then a report would have to be issued, and the recommendation would be the report be issued prior to whatever next hearing is going to be had on this matter. And the counsel for both applicants have an opportunity to review it, and if they want to submit additional documentation, God knows they know how to find me. And we'll deal with it accordingly.
Right,
I'm
but
assuming,
I
I'm
wasn't-
assuming Mr. DeSessa can do it well enough in advance that we can address whatever issues.
Right. I would just say, I as far as the additional testing goes, I think it is, the burden is on the applicant to prove its case and to prove the meeting of the regulations. And all we would do is confirm our opinion based on that. To do additional testing on our own, I think is
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that. I was just that before we'd have our next session, if there was private discussions between the, applicant, assessors firm and even the objectors, whether or not to have the applicant do additional tests. I didn't know if that would be done amongst the three of them prior to coming back, or do we have that discussion here while reviewing, Mr. Assess's report?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
how does that address, I know there was an issue that was brought up earlier about not being invited to the testing or an email. How does that, so we don't have another issue, if there's going to be additional testing, do both teams get to go out there with the person digging the hole or drilling whatever?
I think that
that was
would
an
be,
issue.
I think that would be the board's expectations. I don't want to put that burden, Mr. DeSessa, have to be a witness and saying yay or nay, the test is being, done correctly or not, because I think that might be getting into a little bit of a gray area, but I would expect everyone to be there, the three, so that everyone could see it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to, because I think a bit of the dispute here is there's questioning whether one is testing being done, and then I can imagine, we're going to start addressing issues. Was it done properly? And I'd rather have, nothing better than everyone watching and seeing the same thing. That way there's no shadow of a doubt. And that's if going down that path. No one is saying right now. I think the only ask here right now is to put together a consolidated report, review of all the reports,
Excuse me, thank you.
for the board to review. Now, whether or not that leads into discussion about additional testing, I think that remains to be seen. My only question was whether or not any decision for that needs to happen here at the next hearing, or if that can be just discussion between the parties. Eric? Am I complicating things?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that's what you get paid for.
That comes with the I think the answer is we get the report.
Right.
It's submitted to the parties. And maybe what happens is the three attorneys have a conversation as to where we go in terms of the procedure prior to the meeting. i.e., are they going to submit additional reports? Or are they going to rely on testimony here? Or nothing?
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion, as I said earlier, was, our experts think it's Class D. Their experts haven't done testing but dispute that. To me, the board engineer is the appropriate arbiter of that geotechnical question. But my point is, either way, we'll comply. So, yeah, if we need to, make changes to the plan to add porous pavement or whatever, that's fine. And we're going to need some time after Drew's report to do that. But to me, it makes sense as the board engineer to be the arbitrator of that particular dispute.
I would just say in response to that, I again think there's nothing further to arbit. We've sat here and we have NRCS map sea soils, and we don't have infiltration testing.
But
that's the end of the story as far as recharge goes.
We're not requesting any relief from that. If you look at the case law, yes, the burden is on us when we need relief. But the board engineer had previously testified that we meet the stormwater regs and that we're doing the runoff reductions. So with respect to the soil, it looks like we're down to a very narrow issue. That's my 15 years before this board. We've never gone into geotechnical, and that's fine. We'll do whatever the board wants. But for purposes of, procedurally, if the board engineer could give us the comments, if he has a recommendation for additional testing, we'll do the additional testing. If he has recommendations for an additional design change, we'll implement the design change.
At some point, they've submitted their application, and at some point, they've had every opportunity to comply. And this is not Mr. DeSessa's opinion on what we're talking about here. This is the standards, the stormwater management rules and the NJDEP, which this board has to enforce under their MS4 permit. And we've been here for 5 or 6 meetings. We've been here for almost a year now. The information we've been fully transparent about. I can't imagine what more we have to wait for. this application is not approvable. And we've had plenty of time to try to get there, and we have not.
There's already testimony that the application meets the stormwater regulations.
We could argue testimony all day.
Well, also,
We're not gonna, we're not gonna continue, but
yeah.
I think, let's just get to it. This is a very unique situation in my nearly 20 years involvement with the township. I haven't sat with objectors before, and obviously the area of town is that's been a very sensitive area. So I don't think we're definitely in an unusual circumstance with this. But as I had stated in a prior meeting, I want to give everyone every opportunity, because I'm not interested in hearing that we're going into an appeal. So I want to make sure that everyone has their opportunity to present this case, or their respective case, to the board, and not to deny them that ability.
In addition, Mr. Chairman, the board has the right and the obligation to hear from its various professionals as to giving advice to them.
Yeah.
You've heard the applicant, you've heard the objector. Obviously, the public will have its opportunity to speak at the next meeting. But I think the board has the right, should hear from Mr. DeSessa and his firm relative to all of these competing issues, irrespective of what the council, either of them, believe they have or have not proven.
Yeah, thanks. That's about just what I was about to say. That at this point, I know the two counselors. I know you believe, both of you, that your clients have presented the best possible information to us. But I think at this point, I would recommend that we'd like to hear from Mr. DeSessa after doing a deep dive here, because I think we need to understand all the elements of what we're looking at. And ensure that either we are meeting the regs, we're not meeting the regs, there are discrepancies in the data, whatever it may be. I think we have to rely at this point somewhat on our professionals. And as the chairman noted, we whatever ultimately gets decided here, we want to make sure it's as clean as possible.
Make a motion to adjourn to, what do we have, David?
You guys could shake out. Let me to address the public. We understand where you've been, and we've been trying to work with you. But if you think, well, hold on, please don't interrupt me, and don't scream from the back. We understand where you are, but I think you would rather ensure that we have whatever decision it is clean, then continue to have this tied up as far as it goes in the future. So we're going to make sure that we do all of our due diligence on this, and that's why we have an engineer that we're going to use. If you don't agree with that, I understand, but that's why we have engineers on board.
So I think the first thing we need to do is extend the time of decision, because it's still
I think the first thing you need to do is make a motion.
Make a motion.
To deal with Mr. DeSessa's request, for the board's request that Mr. DeSessa do an analysis of the various reports and, if necessary, testing.
So, Mr. Bernstein, I would like to defer this until Mr. DeSessa can do his due diligence, provide us with the report that we need, and ultimately then determine what the next course would be based upon those findings.
I'll second that.
Okay, any comments from the dais? Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Beason?
Yes.
Mr. Hashtag?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Committeeman Delcor?
Yes.
Mayor LaPlante?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes.
Then the next question is, when is the next available meeting?
Yes. Next available meeting is in October. That being said, I am retiring at the end of the year, so hurry up. This applicant, Redcom, has 2 applications scheduled in September. They want to push one of those to create an opening.
I see a head shake now, so we're going to go
Okay.
and find a date in October.
October The most clearly open one is October 13th.
That should give you plenty of time, Drew, to get a report together.
Mr. Brodnick willing to waive time of decision?
Oh, yes.
Yes, sir. We will certainly extend to the end of October.
Thank you. And you'll sign the necessary paperwork when submitted.
I always do.
I didn't say you did. The record.
So we need a
Therefore, it's a
motion.
motion to extend this matter without further notice to October the 3rd, 13th, pardon me, 2022 at either 7 or 7:30
Yeah.
PM, depending on what the board does. Or soon thereafter, the matter may be heard without any further notice.
Yeah, so that's a good point, without further notice. As the board knows, at your last meeting, I guess you decided to, starting in September, begin the meetings at 7 instead of 7:30. You haven't passed an official resolution to that point yet. I don't know if they could do that now, Eric, but I would think to not have to notice that meeting, you're going to have to know what time you're starting. Officially at 7:30 until the board takes a vote on starting them at 7.
So, I stated this last time, at reorganization, we set a time. I assume that to be the case. If we're going to change a meeting time, we should do it in January, not now.
Okay. All right, so it'll be
All
at
right, so
7:30.
7:30, October 13th?
Okay, so we already have a motion and a second, so
Did we?
I think
Michael?
so. Did we?
Be okay in
I
January.
don't know.
You guys-
You know, we're running.
Frank was
Hey,
second.
Frank,
I was the second.
Did you make a motion to,
No, Frank was a motion regarding Mr. DeSessa.
Right.
And the second.
okay,
So we need a roll call on that first.
no, we did that one.
Did that? All right, then we need a motion, a second on the other. I'm confused
On
everybody
extended.
else's.
So a motion to adjourn to the 13th.
Motion's carried.
To carry to,
Carry to the 13th.
without notice.
Without notice. Got a first and a second over here.
Do we?
Yes.
Mike got it? All right. Any comments? Roll call, please.
Wagner,
Yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Razzak,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Unami Delcor,
Yes.
Mayor LaPlante,
Yes.
Chair Sarach.
Yes. Okay. So.
So we'll see
continue
you
that.
all on the 13th,
Right.
okay?
And just a reminder, we do still have the 23rd.
Yes, we have the business meeting. We will likely be reviewing an ordinance at that night.
And I think Mr. Hashtag was going to be the de facto chair because I know last time I wasn't around. I know I'm not available and I believe
Neil isn't.
Neil wasn't either.
23rd?
Yeah.
Planning on not being there now, Ken?
I thought you said he would be there that week. There was a different week he wouldn't be there.
As long as we have a quorum.
I don't know. Just be prepared.
Let me know ahead of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so if anybody can't make it, please get in touch with Deborah at the earliest. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
It's 1-0
Good night.
Rangers for those who care.